There's a name quietly circulating across the internet right now, slipping through comment sections, whispered in long threads, stitched into late-night TikTok videos, and shadowed Instagram reels. A name that doesn't appear in textbooks, press releases, or mainstream headlines, yet somehow carries the weight of something enormous. Project Anchor. And depending on who you ask, it's either the most dangerous classified initiative ever conceived or the most elaborate fabrication the internet has produced in years. Because according to the narrative spreading online, Project Anchor is not just a research program, not just another aerospace experiment, but a planetary contingency system allegedly designed to stabilize Earth itself, a system created in response to a threat so extreme it couldn't be disclosed publicly. And the claim is that sometime in early 2026, internal documents tied to this project were leaked, revealing that on August 12, 2026, at precisely 2:33 p.m. UTC, something unprecedented is scheduled to occur. A brief 7-second disruption in Earth's gravitational hold. Not an accident, not a natural anomaly, but a controlled or anticipated event tied directly to whatever Project Anchor is meant to prevent, correct, or counteract. And the reason this rumor has gripped so many people isn't just the fear of floating objects or collapsing structures. It's the implication that gravity itself, the force humanity has always assumed was immutable, might be vulnerable, measurable, and manipulable under certain cosmic conditions. And those who believe the Project Anchor narrative argue that this isn't about gravity turning off in a simple sense, but about a momentary destabilization caused by an external factor we are either approaching, intersecting with, or already inside of, something large enough that governments would choose silence over panic. And what makes Project Anchor especially compelling is how little concrete information exists about it, because the alleged documents don't read like polished reports. They're described as fragmented, technical, partially redacted, referencing mass stabilization thresholds, planetary inertia compensation, and anchoring parameters that don't align cleanly with publicly discussed space missions, leading some to speculate that Project Anchor isn't a NASA-only operation at all, but a multinational or even off-world monitoring initiative, quietly tracking variables humanity doesn't yet fully understand. And in these circles, August 12th, 2026 isn't random. It coincides with a precise astronomical alignment, a total solar eclipse, a moment where celestial bodies line up with mathematical exactness. And while eclipses themselves are ancient and familiar, Project Anchor theorists argue that this specific alignment interacts with something else, a wave, a field, a distortion, a mass shadow, that briefly affects Earth's gravitational equilibrium, and the 7-second window repeatedly mentioned isn't framed as arbitrary, but as the exact duration needed for the planet to pass through this instability zone, with Project Anchor either acting as a safeguard or as a monitoring system prepared to respond if something goes wrong. And this is where the story splits into multiple interpretations, because some believe Project Anchor exists to prevent catastrophic loss of gravity, others believe it exists because the event cannot be prevented, only measured and mitigated. And a more unsettling theory suggests Project Anchor may even be responsible for triggering the event in a controlled way to avoid something far worse later on. And what keeps fueling these discussions is the absence of clear answers. No definitive explanation of what Project Anchor is. No public acknowledgement, no document conclusively proving or disproving its existence. Only patterns, coincidences, alleged insider language, and a growing sense among believers that humanity may be closer to a planetary-scale experiment or encounter than we're being told. And as these theories spread, the question stops being, will gravity disappear, and becomes something deeper and more philosophical. How much do we really understand about the forces holding our world together? How much is truly settled science? And how much remains classified, theoretical, or deliberately obscured? Because throughout history, many things once dismissed as impossible later became accepted realities. And Project Anchor sits right at that uncomfortable intersection between established knowledge and the unknown, forcing anyone who hears about it to decide whether this is the internet's latest myth or an early glimpse into a future revelation that hasn't yet surfaced. So now the question isn't what to believe, but how to interpret the silence, the timing, the alignment, the precision of the claims, and the sheer confidence with which Project Anchor is being discussed in certain circles. And I want you to think carefully about this. If Project Anchor were real, would you expect it to be announced openly or hidden behind layers of ambiguity until the moment passed? And if it weren't real, why does the story feel so detailed, so specific, so anchored to a date and time? And ultimately, when August 12th, 2026 arrives, will it be remembered as the day nothing happened at all, or the day the world briefly experienced something it was never meant to notice? And that's where I leave it to you. What do you think Project Anchor really is? And as the narrative around Project Anchor continues to expand, it starts pulling in threads from places most people never think to connect. Because those who follow this story closely point out that humanity has always treated gravity as a background constant rather than an active system, something that simply exists rather than something that could ever require monitoring or intervention. Yet Project Anchor, as it's described in these circulating accounts, challenges that assumption entirely by framing gravity not as an unchanging force, but as a dynamic balance, one that can be stressed, distorted, or briefly destabilized under certain extreme conditions. Conditions that may not originate from Earth at all, and that's where speculation deepens, because some interpretations of the alleged Project Anchor material suggest it wasn't created in response to an internal planetary issue, but rather an external approach, an incoming variable whose mass, trajectory, or field interaction could momentarily interfere with Earth's gravitational coherence. And while no single explanation dominates these discussions, recurring language like threshold breach, mass shadow overlap, an inertial lag window keeps appearing in retellings of the supposed leak, leading believers to argue that this isn't random internet storytelling, but fragments of highly technical language filtered down through people who didn't fully understand what they were sharing. And in this version of the story, August 12th, 2026 becomes not a prediction, but a calculated intersection point, a moment when Earth, the Moon, the Sun, and something else unseen align in a way that temporarily exposes a weakness or fluctuation that Project Anchor was built to observe, buffer, or possibly correct. And the 7-second duration remains one of the most unsettling details because it's short enough to feel deliberate rather than catastrophic, yet long enough to imply that something measurable is occurring, something that can be timed, anticipated, and logged. And some theorists argue that if gravity were to destabilize even slightly, the effect wouldn't necessarily look like people floating into the sky as movies portray, but rather a subtle, disorienting shift, a momentary reduction in downward force that could manifest differently depending on altitude, mass, and velocity, meaning aircraft, satellites, ocean tides, and even Earth's rotation might experience tiny anomalies that most people would never consciously notice, yet instruments designed for Project Anchor would. And this raises an even deeper question. Is Project Anchor meant to protect humanity, or is it meant to protect the data? Because in some speculative circles, the idea is floated that the true purpose of Project Anchor is not intervention at all, but observation, a way to gather unprecedented measurements during a rare planetary event that may never occur again within a human lifetime. And if that's the case, the secrecy wouldn't be about hiding danger, but about controlling interpretation, because revealing in advance that Earth is about to pass through a gravitational anomaly, however brief, could trigger mass panic, economic instability, and political chaos long before the event itself ever arrives. And that leads some people to argue that silence would be the most logical response regardless of whether Project Anchor is real or not, because governments have historically withheld information not only when danger was imminent, but when the public reaction posed a greater threat than the event itself. And when you place Project Anchor into that historical pattern, alongside other projects that were once denied, dismissed, or ridiculed before later being acknowledged decades afterward, the story begins to feel less absurd to those inclined to question official narratives. Yet at the same time, the absence of verifiable documents keeps the entire concept suspended in uncertainty, creating a perfect environment for belief, skepticism, curiosity, and fear to coexist without resolution. And this unresolved tension is exactly what keeps Project Anchor alive in online discourse, because it sits at the edge of plausibility, neither provably real nor conclusively false in the minds of those who follow it. And as August 12th, 2026 slowly approaches, the discussions intensify rather than fade, with some people asking why a hoax would anchor itself to a specific future date instead of exploiting immediate panic.